Okay, I thought I would begin with a quick agenda so you know where I'm headed with this presentation and you know when I'm going to get to the good parts. I will talk a little bit about me. I will talk about developer education at Netflix. I'll talk about our problems and why checklists are a solution. I will give you some examples of our checklist, and I promise I'm going to share the checklist with you. I will talk about gaining adoption for the checklist and some potential outcomes. Okay, so here's a little bit about me and why I'm qualified to create internal learning checklists. I grew up in a tech family. I was a big nerd. My siblings and I, we built our own computers. We argued about which programming language was best at dinner. So when I started college, I was quickly recruited to the Centers for Teaching and Learning, where I assisted faculty with incorporating multimedia into their courses. You could say that I became an accidental instructional designer. And before long, I was promoted to web support analyst, where I managed our web servers, our college websites, our online learning tools, including our learning management systems, quiz builder surveys, mailing lists. And if it didn't exist, or it was too expensive, because I worked for a college, we didn't have a lot of money, then I would build the app myself. Eventually, my role expanded to needing a team, and I became a director of web services. And after a while, I was asking myself, okay, what's next? My only career growth option within the college system was to become a chief technology officer. So I wrapped up my master's degree, and I was being actively recruited for CTO positions when I had an epiphany. I had never really tested my boundaries. I was like an ant in a pencil drawn circle. Does everyone know the viral video? If you take a piece of paper and there's an ant on it and you draw a circle around it, that ant thinks it's a barrier that it can't cross. And this is a great visual example for the fact that limits only exist in your mind. And at some point in my career, I had drawn a circle around the academic side of the public sector. Now, they were smart. They took me off the market when I was still a teenager. They became my family, and I still love and miss them. But I did decide to apply to Netflix. And I felt like the culture memo felt like it was written for me. I love the idea of entertaining the world. The interview process was intense. It started off with a phone interview, and then I came in person, and there were 3 panels in the morning. And by lunch, they let you know if they're kicking you off the island or if you're going to continue on for another 3 panels. I have to be honest, I was terrified. I was a big fish in a small bowl, and I was jumping into this huge unknown ocean. I had to remind myself that I was worthy, and I still have to remind myself today because I am surrounded by some of the best talent in the world, and I just hope it brushes off on me. Now, if you want to know more about me and my geeky hobbies and the fact that I have no life, you can go to my website at jasmine.com. So I've now worked at Netflix for over a year, and it was one of the best decisions of my life. And just in case you don't know what Netflix does, we do one thing, and that is entertainment. And we aim to do it really well. We live and breathe TV and films, and we want everyone to be able to enjoy them too, whether it's an easy escape or something that provokes debate. Now, Netflix is the world's leading streaming entertainment service, and we just announced this last week that we have 200 paid members in over 190 countries. Now, as we've expanded our offerings around the world, we've also grown in the number of engineers that we've needed to support that growth. And getting our engineers the knowledge that they need to be successful is the developer education team's top priority, and that is the team that I am on. We're a small, scrappy team of 4, but we have the perfect combination of skills. Now, I know I'm going to be talking primarily about engineers, but 90% of what I cover is applicable to other orgs outside of engineering. At Netflix, we have several buckets of engineers, and the developer education team is responsible for onboarding our engineers, the continuous learning, our learning toolkit, and knowledge management. And guess what? We are hiring. We're looking for a dev ed leader. If you're interested, please apply. And we will be hiring for a TPM position in the future. We need someone to assist us with knowledge management and our technical documentation. Okay, so now you know about me, you know about Netflix, you know what my team does. Let's go into the problems that we are trying to solve. Our engineers, as subject matter experts, facilitate a majority of our workshops. Now I know that there's some division at companies when it comes to having employees teach each other instead of hiring professional trainers. Now, this is how Netflix Dev Ed sees it. There's some pros and there's some cons. The pros are it aligns with our culture. Netflix encourages our engineers to share information openly and broadly and to be selfless. Not only that, but our engineers are experts about the products and the dependencies, and they understand how the products impact other teams and how to avoid common issues. We build hundreds of internal applications and we help facilitate our studio. So since so much of our business is based on homegrown applications, it can be difficult to bring in external trainers. Our engineers get to witness where our users struggle, so that helps build empathy. And facilitating trainers build relationship with engineers because they know who to reach out to and who to collaborate with, so that helps build community. It helps their communication skills in general, which translates to better teamwork. It carries into the documentation and in-app support. I mean, to us, we believe in investing in our engineers, and we believe instructional design and public speaking are all skills that enhance someone. We have an entire internally built suite of engineering tools that our engineers use to build internal apps, and training increases the amount of time that our engineers who are building the tools interact with our engineers who are using the tools. So that enhances our customer first mentality. And we have 2,000 engineers with a variety of unique experiences and talents. Of those, 100 are currently conducting workshops. So it would be impossible for 4 people to provide that scale of learning if we were to teach those workshops ourselves. Now, there are some cons, don't get me wrong, and that's why we have our checklist as solutions. One is it's expensive. We pay our engineers top of market, and we're pulling them away from projects to create and conduct training. And they're not professional trainers. So some of our engineers have zero experience doing presentations, and they make all the classic mistakes, and that can result in some painful experiences for them and the learners. Okay, we also use the PlusPlus event management system. I don't know, maybe you've heard of it. And we have the permission set so that anyone in the company can create an event. Now, we started off with a couple hundred events, but that number almost doubles every year. And we are thrilled that so many of our stunning colleagues want to offer training. At the same time, we want to help ensure our volunteer trainers and our learners are maximizing their time. Because if you break down the costs to a room full of engineers for an hour, plus the time needed for an engineer to create that content and offer the training, every workshop is costing the company thousands of dollars. Now, there's only 4 of us, so we have to find the best ways to maximize our time to have the most positive impact on engineering learning. Now, there isn't one solution to our problem. It requires multiple scalable mechanisms that work in collaboration. Of those, one of them is a checklist. The advantages of checklists are it saves time. Our engineers are busy. They want to know what the fastest, most efficient way to offer effective training. I mean, in engineering lingo, they want that README file with the documentation on how to get up and running quickly, and they want as much as possible to be automated. Self-service. Our dev ed team recently switched orgs, and we did a self-assessment. We approached all of our engineering managers to ask for feedback on how dev ed could have the best impact at Netflix. Now, one of the items that was brought up repeatedly was self-service how-to guides. They didn't want to wait for the workshop. They didn't want to sit through a 2-hour video recording of the workshop. They wanted a self-service, self-paced, asynchronous solution on how best to build trainings. Agile. Our engineers are used to Jira tasks and Kanban boards. They like to have things in list format so they can flag things as completed. Checklists just work really well in an engineering culture. And checklists are an easy reference. Our engineers don't teach every day. And even if we train them on how to be great teachers, they're going to forget anything that they don't apply or use often. I mean, plus we want them to use their brain power for engineering tasks. I don't know if you've read the best-selling book, but Sasha reminded me of the Checklist Manifesto. And it mentions that checklists provide a cognitive safety net, so you don't have to worry about remembering everything. I mean, we already have enough on our plates. Okay, so in order to maximize time, I have to take multiple years worth of instructional design and faculty training and carve out the bare minimum that someone needs to know to be an effective trainer. And we call this the minimum learnable unit. And I stole this from Tim Ferriss. I don't know if you know who he is, but he's one of my favorite podcasters and authors. And he's also done several talks on the art and science of learning anything faster. Now, to do this, I'm giving them instead of giving them how to teach and having them figure out how to apply that to their own trainings, we just dive right in. The checklists do a majority of the thinking for them, and when it comes to carrying out the best practices for their trainings. Okay, at Netflix, we follow the traditional instructional design model called Addie. Who here is familiar with the Addie model? And it feels like no one has their camera on. So if you could just say yes in the chat, so I know who our instructional designers are. Okay, good. Okay, great. So I created a checklist for each phase of the Addie model, and I see some of you are already very familiar with it. Okay, the first phase is analysis, and this starts even before they begin creating their training. And it's not uncommon that someone approaches me with a slide deck and they are ready to teach. They completely skipped over analysis. And that's okay because I still use the checklist to give them feedback. And that way they can choose to update their slides, or they'll have the checklist for next time they build a training. The checklists are in a table format and it's a series of yes or no questions. Anything that they say no to, we can work on together. And I know that this is really small and it's hard to read. I promise I'm going to give you a link to all of my checklists at the end. In academia, we had rubrics and checklists for everything, and we shared them openly with other colleges. For example, faculty teaching remotely use rubrics called Quality Matters. And if you Google that, you're going to find a ton of resources. Now, I was on many collaborative consortiums and statewide initiatives. I felt like I worked for 114 colleges instead of 3. However, I've discovered that corporate developer education is a little niche and cross-company collaboration is not as open as the public sector. So my hope is to apply the best practices from academia to developer education in the private sector and share as much as I can so that we can maybe build a collaborative repository of shared resources. So at this point, I want to get an idea of how many of you would be willing to share your learning resources if there were a repository in existence. If you would be interested, could you just type in "I'm in the chat? And hopefully we can start collaborating maybe on a Slack channel. Technocon has a great Slack channel that Sasha can talk about later. Oh, yay, I'm so excited that we've got some people who are interested. Wonderful. Okay, so back to the Addie analysis checklist. I don't have time to walk through all the questions, and you don't want to listen to that anyway, because that would be boring. But I'm going to give you some examples of questions that I like and why I feel they're important. And also, let me know if any of these resonate with you. The first one is this workshop the best solution? Sometimes workshops can be a crutch for a poorly designed application or lack of documentation. Is there a better way to solve this problem without having a workshop? I mean, putting together a quality 1-hour workshop for the first time, we have to be realistic, that can take about 20 hours. And we've already discussed how expensive it is to have a room full of engineers for an hour. So if you can write a 1-page memo and get the same result, then it is far more efficient to write that memo. Okay, what will the impact be on the company if this training is successful? For example, we have an engineer who's currently working on OOPS training. And OOPS stands for Operational Opportunities Project Space. So whenever our engineers make a mistake, they do a write-up on what went wrong and how we're going to avoid it in the future. And other companies call these postmortems, which is kind of morbid, but if we are successful with the trainings, then we will have more engineers who are completing OOPS, so we can measure that by an uptick in OOPS submissions. We will have more engineers reading OOPS, so we will have an uptick in traffic. And hopefully we have less mistakes repeated because engineers are learning from each other's mistakes. So not only will this workshop provide impact, but we have measurable ways to prove the impact. Does your audience have biases? Okay, so a majority of our engineers at Netflix are senior level, and when you approach them with a new topic, more than likely, they're gonna have an opinion on its potential success. At Netflix, we farm for dissent, so people are encouraged to share their opinions, and it can be very intimidating at first to have dozens of engineers tell you why your idea is awful. So eventually you get used to it and you appreciate all the feedback because of the Dunning-Kruger effect. You don't know what you don't know, but it's likely that there's a few people in the room who do know, so they're going to save you from making costly mistakes. Now, typically you should address any biases at the start of your training because anyone who believes it will fail, they will tell you immediately at Netflix. Or at other companies, they might zone out, or even worse, they might sabotage your efforts later. For example, when addressing bias, an example of me addressing the bias right away is when I recently dealt with implementing Stack Overflow and I wanted to do moderator training. The thing was, we had Stack Overflow in 2014 and we eventually got rid of it in 2016 because it wasn't being used. So before I could even talk about the benefits of Stack Overflow in 2021, I had to address why I thought it was going to work this time when it obviously failed before. Okay, many of our engineers dislike public speaking. I mean, most people dislike public speaking, but building these skills will help build their confidence. It will make them more likely to speak up during meetings and they'll be able to present better at conferences. So we have 4 options that I jokingly call the, oh crap, I have to do public speaking options. And one is I will cap their workshop. I'll keep them really small for when they're ready, until they're ready to talk to a larger group. And one of the nice things about PlusPlus is it makes it really easy for me to limit the enrollment in the workshop. And then I can have a wait list so I have an idea and I can gauge demand. Sometimes having lots of smaller group trainings is better than having larger ones. We can recommend tools and templates for them to record their training so they can perfect every slide and compile it into a polished video. There's this fantastic mobile app called Speako. I know it works on the iPhone. I'm not sure if it's on the Android OS, but it allows you to practice speaking in private. It gives you feedback on the number of filler words you use, your intonation, and your speed. And of course, you can hire a professional trainer to come in, and we do that occasionally through our learning and development department. Okay, the second phase of the Addie model is design. And design is creating the text outline of your content, planning out potential visuals, and getting feedback. So normally I ask trainers to create an outline in a Google Doc in a bullet format. And then I have 8 considerations on the checklist, which I will go through with them. Okay, again, I know I'm sorry that this is really small, but I'm gonna pick my favorite 2 for us to review. The first one is to be concise. Almost all of our engineers are tempted to cram too much material into their training, and that's because we are passionate about what we're presenting. And we're also insecure that our colleagues have allocated their time to listen to us, and we want to ensure that we give them what they want. And the best way to ensure that we do that is just cover everything. One of the most challenging things to do is to ask a passionate engineer to reduce their content. But I found that most engineers appreciate when you give them research supporting your recommendations. So on my checklist, it will include resources or information behind theories so they know that I'm not just trying to ruin their lives when I tell them to narrow their training focus. Now, I will present the idea in the simplest, most concise way possible. I call this the Don't Make Me Think version from the Steve Krug's classic book. However, if an engineer wants to know more, the checklist will point them to, let's say, the cognitive load theory, which suggests that learners can absorb and retain information effectively only if it's provided in such a way that does not overload their mental capacity. And then, of course, we argue about an engineer's mental capacity, but that's another story. Another checklist item is for them to use visuals. If the outline is on a Google Doc, then we can just highlight all the items that we think that we could find an infographic for, create a chart, maybe get a screenshot. This slide explains the Don't Make Me Think version, and if they want to learn more on why visuals are important, then they can read about the pictorial superiority effect, which is that people have a 65% higher chance of remembering things if there is an image and text. Development is the third phase of the Addie model, and development is the creation of your slides and activity, and my development checklist consists of 7 considerations. And my favorite point of these 7 is to make it applicable. Retention of learning occurs best when participants can associate the new information with previous information. Now, the real value added to your training over all the other canned courses that they can watch online is that you customized it. So you want to apply concepts, so real world issues that you're having within your organization. So these are 3 examples of things that I like to do in my trainings. I'll start with something like this. Who's done this before? You're tired, you're distracted, and you hit reply and it goes to an entire distribution list. You just accidentally spammed your entire company. Let me dive into a better solution so this will never happen again. Or you'll show them a common error message. Who's seen this error? Who hates this error as much as I do? Let me tell you how you can prevent never seeing this error again. And then I'll dive into how to fix it. Or when using example data, I'll use relatable data sets. So I can pull data from production into a testing environment where they can play safely. The 4th phase of the Addie model is implementation, and that's the workshop itself and how the content is presented. You could say right now I'm in the implementation phase of this presentation. And I have 18 tips for implementation on this checklist. And I know that that sounds like a lot, but you can go through them really quick. For example, how was the location? It was remote. I could wear my sweats. It was great. Did you have an engaging start to get your learners' attention? Did you introduce yourself? Did you share your training etiquette and when it was best to ask questions? How was your pace? Were you nervous and you talked too fast? I probably did because I do that all the time. The final phase of the Addie model is evaluation, which should occur throughout the process, allowing you to refine your training based on experience and feedback. Now, evaluation is one of the most challenging aspects of training because engineers want to measure everything, and we want to find automated ways to do it, and we want to remove anything that's subjective. Unfortunately, we can't take out the human piece of the evaluation. So in my checklist, I include 4 categories of evaluation. Many of you will know these as the Kirkpatrick model. But to me personally, the best results are when your learner are applying their newly learned skills and when they're asking you for more sessions. Okay, at this point, you're probably thinking, Jasmine, it's been 20 minutes. Share these checklists already. So like any true web geek, I bought a domain name and I used this as an opportunity to brush up on my Node.js and React skills. So this site is still a work in progress, but the checklists are there. So please feel free to use them, adapt them, use them for your own needs. I mean, don't sell them. Think of this as an open source initiative. So if you go to the website deved.net, you can navigate to the training checklist in the lower right-hand corner, or you can just go to /training-checklists. Okay, getting adoption of these checklists. You have the checklists. How are you going to get your company to adopt them? Well, I'll let you know how Netflix does it. Thank you for sharing that link, Andy. We use the 4 Ds. So the first one is demand. Sometimes we'll do lean launches or proof of concepts, which is a minimum viable solution to gauge demand. But we already knew what our engineers wanted based on the surveys of the leadership, so the demand was there. You have to make things discoverable. So we have everything linked on our websites and on our internal portals. We dog food it, which means we use the checklist ourselves and we use them while we're doing training evaluations, and we use them as we're creating our own presentations. And then develop. The checklists are a collaborative effort, so we seek feedback and people are likely to adopt a process if they feel they were part of the development. So if we consider these checklists a continuous development and they're evolving with feedback, that's the develop phase. Sorry, I'm trying to read the chat too and I'm confusing myself. Okay, Toolkit. We consider our learning checklist as tools in the developer education learner's toolbox. We believe in making our toolkit accessible so that we can empower our users to use them without ever having to directly interact with a dev ed team member. At Netflix, we empower people to make their own choices, and rather than policies, we provide best practices and frameworks. And we don't mandate anyone use these checklists. They are available for reference, but our facilitators have the freedom to use the tools that work best for them. So I have to admit that this is a 180 from academia, where there's an extensive process for everything, but reducing the bureaucratic processes and workflows works really well within the Netflix culture. So I'm sharing this with you because if you choose to use these checklists with your own training facilitators, give them the freedom to do it their own way too. And who knows, maybe something they do is not on my list. And if that happens, let's share it with the group. Let's all learn together. Okay, outcomes. If a subject matter expert chooses to work with the dev ed team for assistance, I mean, I personally believe that we help provide feedback that leads to improved training. Wrong slides. Okay. It makes my life easier as a member of the developer education team to have a standardized way to evaluate any subject expert that wants feedback. Our engineering leadership has been happy because we're creating the deliverables based on their feedback. I have not needed to teach one Addie session since creating these checklists. The checklist itself is like a virtual dev ed coordinator doing a consult. Everyone I've shared them with has provided me positive feedback of the workshops that have used the list. I've seen a better flow of content, less text, more confident presenters. But I think part of that confidence comes from the fact that they're more familiar with the content that they're presenting because they put a lot more thought into how they organize things. And I don't have numbers on if the feedback from sessions using the checklist is higher than the feedback from those who don't. The truth is our subject matter experts come in at different levels, so it's difficult to compare them against each other. You have to compare them against themselves. So I have to ask for like sort of a self-reflection, and I will ask them if they feel the checklist help them create better presentations and be better presenters. And they've always said yes. Okay, thank you so much for listening. I hope you found some of this presentation useful, and I look forward to collaborating with some of you in the future. Are there any questions?
First of all, thank you, Jasmine. This was an awesome, just the breadth of material you covered in such a short time. Really great presentation, great delivery, but also really amazing resources that we can all go to and leverage long after this talk is over. So really, thank you for that. And and as Jasmine said, this was be a great time to post your questions in the chat so we can make sure they get addressed. One, just to kick things off, one question that I have for Jasmine is, this is awesome. Obviously, you sort of tackled the problem, you came up with a solution, you it seems to have iterated on this solution to get it to this level of polish. You have now shared a solution with us as well as with your colleagues at Netflix. What do you see next? Like, where do you go with this? Where do you see this going, sort of both within and Netflix as well as in the broader industry?
Okay, great question. um, I want to continue to develop the checklist, so hopefully with collaboration of other teams that are on this call. I'm going to continue to add more resources to the DevEd website. I have more ideas for checklists, such as like best practices for developer onboarding, or best practices for knowledge management, best practices for internal communication. I want to create templates for self-paced learning. So mostly it's about just getting the best of breed and getting people to collaborate so that we can sort of like open source these ideas and hopefully people can contribute.
Awesome. And on that note, I did want to ask you, since you mentioned developer, and I know that that's the audience that you serve. You also said at the beginning that you feel 90% of this is applicable to other roles. Have you seen evidence of that at Netflix, and how have your colleagues serving non-developer roles reacted to this? And are you seeing engagement with these resources that you've been providing?
Well, the Addie model isn't just for engineers. It's an instructional design model that's so everything that I have within the checklist, there might be one or two things that are specific to engineer and maybe like new technology adoption, but a lot of it is very broad, so that it can then be applied to any sort of training. As far as going outside of developer education, I have the resources available. We have lots of different learning teams within Netflix. I don't know if they are actively using it. I hope they are, but I don't see anyone from those teams on this call today.
Got it. All right, thank you. And just as a side note, like I'm very feeling very inspired by this, and I would love to explore ways to bake some of this right into Plus Plus as a sort of like in the flow of work you're being prompted for the right kinds of things. We should talk about that separately. But anyway, I do want to jump into some of the questions that I'm seeing. So Alex asked, are checklists paper-based or digital, and how are you collecting the data? I guess maybe buried in this question is, are they self-serve, or is there some, like, are you also looking for answers to, or results of how people are filling these out?
They're mostly self-serve. They're in Google Docs. At Netflix, and this was kind of a culture shock for me as well, they don't use paper for anything. So everything is digital, and even though it's in a Google Doc, you can transfer it to a spreadsheet if you wanted to. You could just check off the items. What I will do is when I'm listening to a training and I'm checking things off and I'm giving people feedback, I'll then present that to them in a Google Doc, and that will be sort of their evaluation that we build off of.
Got it. Awesome. And just so you know, like I was taking notes as well on some of the slides that were being highlighted. I see um, slide 12 came up quite a bit around pros and cons that you've listed. Slide 17, where you talked about checklist as a tool, seems to resonate quite a bit. And 25. At least that one really resonated with me. This idea of like, does this even need to be training? Like just posing that question, it seems a little bit weird, given when we have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. But it's awesome to sort of start with those fundamental questions. So I see, and I don't know what your first name is. I apologize, but I see a question here around how do you market courses, if at all, and how do you extend the course to help with application and retention?
How do we market courses, and what was this second part?
So how do you extend the course? Like this probably gets to the question of like the application, right? Like how do you know that things are being applied, and how do you test for retention? Is there anything that helps you kind of especially as a presenter to see the impact that you've had on the folks that you facilitated?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question. So to start, as far as how we market the workshops, we do use the PlusPlus platform. And like I said before, everyone can contribute and create their own courses. So it's grown organically. It's almost like Craigslist because everyone is just contributing to it. And now people know that this is the portal for anything that's being offered as far as training company-wide. So that's been really nice. As far as testing for retention of information, that is difficult because it's not like in higher ed or academia, we would do like a pre-test and then we would do a post-test and we would compare those. The only thing that we can do is, let's say we're doing a training on something like Elasticsearch. We will see if they're then applying Elasticsearch, if they're using Elasticsearch within their teams. All we can do is just know whether or not they're applying those newly learned skills. And there's not an automated way to do that. A lot of times it's us talking to the facilitator or their engineering managers.
Mm-hmm. And I see a question from Daniel, and this maybe ties into also the previous question, since you mentioned that everyone, anyone can essentially post, put together an event and offer it to the organization. At what point do they learn about these checklists? At what point do you sort of expose them to these best practices that you and your team have put together for them? How does that, both maybe even, from the recruiting to the onboarding process, what does that look like?
So we have the Dev Ed website where we post all of our resources. It's just an internal website for us. We have a homegrown learning management system that we wrote ourselves in Node.js and React, and we call it Learn It. And we post all of our resources and our labs there for like asynchronous type learning. I do know that PlusPlus may be coming out with solutions in the future where we can retire some of those features and hopefully just move everything into PlusPlus, so it will become more of an asynchronous and synchronous learning management system for us. And did I miss another part of the
Yeah,
question?
it's more, yeah, and thank you for that. I appreciate the plug. But my, the question I wanted to ask you is like, how does someone, say I'm a new presenter at, like an engineer who wants to teach my fellow peers at Netflix, um, do I actively seek out the resources from this website? Does someone knock on my door after they notice my feedback and sort of point me to things that I might have missed? How does that sort of process, or is there a process, or is it sort of very organic and sort of, people already know because everyone's doing it that way?
So we do the onboarding for all of our engineers. So we plant those seeds in the
Mm-hmm.
beginning. Like as soon as they become employees, part of the onboarding process is they learn about DevEd and the services that we offer. And then they can reach out to us via Slack. People don't use email as often within Netflix as well. So it's a lot of Slack notifications. We have several channels. We've got channels just for facilitators to collaborate. We have channels for getting support from DevEd. And then we have channels for people who want to create trainings.
Got it. And I'm gonna just use this opportunity to invite folks to submit more questions. But one that I used to get a lot is in this world where training is democratized and anything seems to go. Have you run into issues where like somebody's training completely bombs and they're not quite getting it, or not quite able to sort of benefit from this kind of guidance and support and resources your team gets? And do you worry about how they may reflect on you or their peers or the organization?
Um, we have this strange mentality. I guess it's not strange, but at Netflix, if you're not failing, you're not trying hard enough. So when someone doesn't fail, we feel like they're not challenging themselves. So we don't see failure as an issue. We see that as someone stretching themselves and trying to learn. And we then use that as a learning opportunity for us to go in and help with feedback them improve in the future.
Got it. So essentially doing it after the fact is okay, and trying to preempt and sort of curate things actively in advance, is not always necessary. Is that what I'm hearing?
That is what you're hearing. And
Awesome.
it's part of our culture that we give people the freedom to explore, and we treat people as an adults. So we don't mandate things.
Got it. And that's, I think, the second part of Daniel's question. And Daniel, if you feel like that Jasmine hasn't answered your question, feel free to let us know in chat. And if others have more questions, feel free to post them. I had another one. In the meantime, since you shared with us this website that you put together for these resources, the question is like, how would we, or your group of peers, best contribute to this? Obviously, this is a great resource, and I think it's really amazing that you've done this. But like, how would we contribute feedback, or you said open source? Like, how do you imagine that working?
I'm not sure. I was first kind of testing the waters to see if there was enough interest. I think initially doing it via the TechnoCon Slack channel, and then I can share it on the website as we have final versions of things. This website is built off of the Ghost headless CMS. I don't know if people are familiar with that. So potentially I can add members so that people could contribute content to it. We'll see if when it gets to that point. I know you mentioned too the possibility of using like GitHub repositories, but I was a little bit worried that raised the cognitive barrier a little bit too high for people that might not be familiar with pushing things into a repository.
Got it. And just for everyone, for folks here who are not familiar with TechnoCon, it's a community of folks who are in the space of learning and development, specifically serving the technical technology sort of industry and technology folks. That's somewhat loosely defined because kind of technology has weaved itself into everything these days. And Marco, I saw previously posted a link to that Slack channel, that's where we meet and chat. And then periodically we get together kind of conference style in breakout rooms and discuss various topics from onboarding to curriculum development to measuring things, to dealing with like online versus in person, to async versus blended, and on and on and on. It's a great community to be part of. If you're not there, I invite you to check it out. All right. Any other questions? We do have maybe about 5 more minutes of questions to go before we can wrap things up. But I want to invite the audience. All right. So another question: how do you characterize the demand of tech skills and soft skills at Netflix?
Ooh, okay. Characterize the demand. Like how many, like what percentage of our courses are technical versus soft skills?
That's probably one way to look at it. Your team, does your team mostly focus on the technical skills? Do you like focus on any technical, like technical soft skills, like technical leadership?
So my team focuses on the technical side, the engineering pieces, and we have a learning and development team that will focus on the soft skills.
Mm-hmm.
So they're the ones that might bring in a consultant to do training on public speaking. Or we have an I&D team, inclusion and diversity team. They've done a lot of trainings for our engineers, and that's been really great. We have some memo writing classes that are offered by our L&D team. So definitely soft skills are offered, but my focus within developer education is the technical side.
Got it. Awesome. Any other questions? I did have a question about your little experiment with slide numbers. How are you sort of thinking about that? Like what are you hoping to get out of the sort of like what resonated the most?
Well, I want to get an idea on which slides, and maybe it's how I presented it or the content that people feel that they can relate to. I feel like if something's relatable, then I should continue to have it in my presentation. Basically, every time I do a presentation, it's going to evolve based on the feedback that I get. And this was a really easy way to get feedback. And because no one has their cameras on, I don't have a way to like gauge facial expressions. So this is another way to see whether or not my audience is engaged by if they're putting in the numbers.
Is that part of your checklist for folks that teaching at Netflix, so they can? This is like a real-time feedback during a presentation.
Well, this is me experimenting with it. You guys are all my guinea pigs, and I think it went really well. I think that I got an idea onto, especially the subject matter expert slide. I at one point would love to have more open conversations with people on if they follow that model as well.
Yeah, and I love this because this could be each of those slides could become like a sort of a breakout discussion down the road. I see a question. Well, Marco asked a question about the future and what's next. You kind of touched on a bit about that, and the measuring success of your initiatives. Is there anything else that sort of you feel it's worth mentioning for the audience that go beyond sort of what you've already discussed?
I mean, at some point, I would love to have kind of a learning CRM solution where we track someone from the point that they onboard with us and sort of their learning journey throughout Netflix. And then just constantly get feedback from them. And I think that that will help us. I also want to recognize people's efforts. I feel that it's taking time out of their day to participate in these trainings or to teach these trainings. And I think that there needs to be some more intrinsic rewards around the fact that people are giving back to the Netflix community.
Yeah, at Twitter, our VP of Eng used to call that company building, and explicitly recognize folks engaged in these activities. So I see another question. Probably we'll be wrapping things up in with a few more questions, but since everyone can create a class, how do you control for duplicate classes? Like it's more around efficiency and making sure that people are there's some degree of curation, I guess. Is that a concern? Is that in terms of in practice at least?
I don't know. We're highly aligned and loosely coupled at Netflix, so that the duplication of courses hasn't really happened yet. It just everyone sort of knows the area that they're experts in. But if it did happen, I think we would just use it as an opportunity to collaborate and combine forces, and then it would just spread the workload.
Got it. Yeah, and that doesn't surprise me. And then one, I guess maybe well, one last question at least.
Mhm.
How do you create a culture where people volunteer to lead training? I mean, you mentioned culture several times, Netflix culture, in terms of like, if you're not failing, you're not trying hard enough, and so on and so on. Is that something that you feel you and your team are just beneficiaries of, that the culture already was there and you were able to just sort of like build on top of it, or you feel like you're able to influence the culture as well? And then what are the magic ingredients that maybe allow for this culture where people can just stand up and teach?
Yeah, I mean, I was surprised because there are so many people at Netflix who are the types of personalities where they want to teach.
Hmm.
I think that the biggest obstacle we have is going from the like, okay, I've got this course and now I need to allocate the time to perfect it so that I feel comfortable enough to present it. And I think that we tend to be perfectionists, and getting people over that hump to say, okay, it's good enough. Like, go ahead and present it as is, and then use that feedback to evolve it into the next version. And you're going to do better every time. So I think it's about giving people the confidence. So I haven't had to motivate people to teach. I've had to give them the confidence to say it's okay for a work in progress to be presented.
Yep. Yep. I hear you. All right. And with that, I'm actually thinking of just wrapping things up. Before we do, thank you, Jasmine, again for such an insightful presentation. I am really excited about both what you're doing at Netflix, but also the fact that you put together that, all these resources that you shared with the rest of us. So I'm excited not just with where it is today, but what this could be in the future.